All right, so I thought I would come on here and just do a live stream for Tony. Make sure I got this. So this live stream will be for exposing targeted Tony Los Angeles, who now has been caught, 100% red-handed lying. Not only is he a gang stalker that calls on targeted individuals to be swatted, like he did about 1 year ago in early 2025 with Candy Grand Prix when he encouraged these other Red Triangle network nodes to call the police, the sheriff's office, or whatever in Louisiana. I think it was Gretna, Louisiana, and he encouraged these network nodes to call the police, right? Make up a bunch of bogus nonsense, right? When and claimed that Candy was wrongfully at the library after hours, and that this was justification. And he was and all the sticky notes were basically all the Red Triangle fake channels were all in the comments of this targeted Tony Los Angeles live stream that took place about 1 year ago. They were all in the comments, dogpiling, right? Amplifying each other's fake messages, right? Their scripts, right? And they were calling on for effectively a witch hunt, right? And they were all, oh yeah, Candy is the worst person in the world, and then targeted Tony, towards the end of the live stream or whatever, I believe, and he, then called on, the nodes to call the sheriff's department, right, a sheriff's office in Louisiana, and make up some bogus nonsense that Candy was at the library without, after hours trespassing or breaking the law or whatever bogus claim, right? When she, and then as a result of that, she was wrongfully, arrested and has had to face bogus charges, right, and court dates as a result of that incident where Tony and these other network nodes were at and encouraging this and targeted Tony spe- specifically called on the Red Triangle network nodes to call up the sheriff's office. He gave the this was their this is their plausible deniable excuse, right? He didn't say explicitly do it, but he was, he was de facto calling on them to, he said, "Here's the sheriff's number. Nobody wants to call it, and go, and it would be a good idea, right? Basically, as she's breaking the wasn't." And anyhow, I'm gonna go ahead and post a link to that video now in the chat showing proof that targeted Tony Los Angeles is a gang stalker that calls on targeted individuals to be swatted. And post that evidence now in the chat. Okay, so let me get this set up here. So anyhow, targeted Tony Los Angeles, he was the one, that went lives, that was live streaming about 1 year ago, right? He was doing this random live stream out of nowhere while Candy was at the library. And basically all the Red Triangle Network nodes, Angie Peterson, PSA, Cine, or whoever else, and they were observing, right? And they were being called on by targeted Tony to call up the sheriff's office and make up some bogus lies that she was breaking the law when she had explicit permission from the library staff to be there, right, after hours to use, Wi-Fi or whatever library still has available after hours. So targeted Tony Los Angeles on Candy Grand Prix and got because he's a gang stalker that's working for the Red Triangle Network, and he's been caught red-handed about this. So I'm going to go ahead and post the proof of this now in the chat, showing that he is a liar. So anybody that's just tuning in, right, please feel free to pause the video for a bit and reference this material here. So there's the link to that video proving that Targeted Tony explicitly lied on Candy and got her wrongfully swatted and ended up, I believe they ended up tackling Candy to the ground, and she was injured as a result of this. And in the months following this, she had to endure court dates, uh, and all this, and it was a high source of stress and trauma and all that. And clearly, the Red Triangle Network nodes like Targeted Tony have been caught lying now about this, because in the video I linked, you can clearly see that Candy had explicit permission to be at the Gretna Library, after hours, to use the Wi-Fi and things of this nature. So Targeted Tony Los Angeles is a liar, and he is one of the network nodes that is now, you know, pretty much been caught guilty, right? Effectively, as calling on targeted individuals to be swatted. So he's obviously in this Red Triangle Network. I'll go ahead and post evidence to support that and prove that effectively. Here, I'll go ahead and post the video now. Okay. Okay. So here's proof that Tony is Red Triangle. So anybody that is tuning in right now and wants to reference that documented material, please, I encourage you to pause the live stream and then catch back up if you haven't already seen these videos before. But Tony last night, I believe he was flooding the chat, actually, or him and his other network nodes were flooding the chat, obviously, last night on the video that I linked in the chat, where it is explicitly shown that Targeted Tony Los Angeles is a liar, right? He lied on Candy Grand Prix and said that she was breaking the law or whatever and not allowed to be at the library and all this and that. And the letter explicitly shows that Targeted Tony Los Angeles is a liar. he called on Candy to be swatted. Candy was tackled to the ground, injured, and in the months following that, faced bogus uh, charges, right, of things of this nature and court dates and a lot of stress, a lot of trauma, right, a lot of bad stuff like this as a result of Targeted Tony Los Angeles's lies, right, and the network's lies, right, because this wasn't just Targeted Tony, right, this was the entire network, the entire Red Triangle gang stalking network that called on that had this that they had this fake live stream, right, where they had Targeted Tony, the big enforcer, up there, the tough guy, the fake tough guy up there, right, and they were all in the chat, they were all in the chat ganging up on Candy, lying on Candy, smearing her good name, trying to manipulate people, right? Gaslight people into believing that she's evil and all this stuff, and that she deserves all these bad things that are happening to her, and that she's a criminal and a scammer and all these lies, right? And Targeted Tony was up there as the big fake enforcer, right? The big fake tough guy, right? And he called on the whole chat to basically call up the sheriff's office and lie on Candy and claim that she was there trespassing, right? Breaking the law and all this nonsense. So Targeted Tony has been caught red-handed now. He's obviously a gang stalker in the Red Triangle Network. Please reference the linked material showing that Targeted Tony is in the Red Triangle Network. And you can see that Targeted Tony also coordinates with network nodes and sticky TT6 mods, right? Such as Angie Peterson specifically, right? Please reference the linked material to see that Tony and Angie Peterson collaborate with one another. For instance, she was giving shout out to Tony, right? As a wink and a nod, like a very veiled, admission that yes, of course, Tony and Angie Peterson and the rest of the Red Triangle Network work with each other and coordinate these swatting attempt, right? Because that whole live stream that Tony did was not thing. It was a coordinated network operation, right? Where they flooded the chat. Tony called on the network nodes in the chat to call the sheriff's office in Gretna, Louisiana, and all that. I believe it was Gretna, and get Candy wrongfully swatted. So she was, from my memory, tackled to the ground, injured, has had to face bogus court dates and criminal charges and whatever else, or charges in general, as a result of that. So clearly, Targeted Tony Los Angeles not only called on Candy to be wrongfully swatted, but he also lied that she was there trespassing, breaking the law, this and that. So, lying on a targeted individual or anyone, right, can be seen as a form of attempted trying to get somebody killed, right? Because any number of things can happen when somebody lies on another person and claims to the police that they're doing something. And, it's known very well that this network lies. It will make up many lies, right, to try to falsely incriminate the target. I mean, I will now also post evidence of this as well. So now I'm going to show the evidence, basically, that this network has been caught red-handed, encouraging their other nodes to call the police on the target, right, on the targets, anybody they don't like. In this case, they're specifically targeting Candy Grand Prix because because she's standing up to them probably more than anybody else, especially at that time. Vocally, very vocally, with documentation, right, and timelines and receipts, and it upset them a lot. So they got this other network node, this other fake targeted individual that's in the Red Triangle Network called Ronald Soriano, and he was also at this time calling on the network nodes to make up lies to the police to get Candy Grand Prix wrongfully swatted and potentially even killed as a result of these lies, because you can only imagine what lies they're telling the police off camera. They can make up any lie, and they will, because they have no moral ethics or standards that would prevent them or make them feel some type of shame or remorse for doing so. So I go ahead and post that now. Okay, so I'm going to link the video in the chat. It's a screenshot of the fake targeted individual, Ronald Soriano, also calling on Candy Grand Prix to be swatted. Okay, so that video is now linked in the chat for anybody that wants to take a moment to reference that. Please pause the live stream and reference that material here. So anyhow, um, Tony, it seems like he's now entered the chat to try to fake intimidate or silence the truth, right? So yeah, anyways, I am exercising my First Amendment right here and documenting your pattern of conduct, your pattern of behavior that's on record, where you explicitly lied on Candy Grand Prix and told all these network nodes and all this stuff that, oh yeah, she is breaking the law, so blah blah blah. Here's the sheriff's number. Go ahead. That was your plausible deniable excuse. That was the theatrical performance you put on, right, to encourage the Red Triangle gang stalkers to call the sheriff's office, which ultimately led to Candy being swatted, right? That was an ongoing thing, right? So let me go ahead and read this comment now from Ronald Soriano. Anyone want to? So this is what Ronald Soriano was saying during this same time period, right? Early 2025. I will read this now. This is the comment that Ronald Soriano was leaving to these Red Triangle network nodes. He said, anyone want to call the Red Roof Inn? I think that's what it's called. It's next to a Waffle House. Say she's screaming and make up a story and tell them to call the cops and needs to get Baker acted. I wanted to do it, but I'd feel bad. I'm a Christian. So now you can see how Ronald Soriano uses the plausible deniability playbook, right? So, anyways, I don't take requests from some weird strangers on the internet that are stalking and harassing people, right? And calling on people to be swatted and making up lies that they are breaking the law when they aren't breaking the law, and that can explicitly be shown by evidence of Candy's letter, right? That was basically notarized by the library staff and signed by them, and still Tony used to lie and make the false claim that Candy Grand Prix was there breaking the law when the letter explicitly shows that is not the case. That was not the case whatsoever. So, you can go ahead and try to threaten me. Go get the rest of your network nodes to flood the chat, run damage control, run smear campaigns, run intimidation campaigns. It will never change the timeline or the documented facts that are now shown with receipts, right? Now I'm showing with receipts here. So, targeted Tony Los Angeles clearly lied and is a member of this Red Triangle network, as you can see by evidence of Angie Peterson, right? Giving him a clear shout out, right? Yeah, so here they are running their damage control script in the comments to obscure the documented timeline and facts that Targeted Tony Los Angeles explicitly called on these network nodes to swat Candy Grand Prix, right? Which, anybody with a reasonable mind knows how dangerous the police can be, especially when false reports start coming in from strangers on the internet that are vindictive, that hate the target, that want to see the target, basically be eliminated, right? So, yeah, it's effectively an attempt at trying to end the target's life, because any number of things can happen when you swat a target, right? A person, and make up lies on them and say any number of bogus things. And another bogus lie that this network was claiming at the time, this lie that they would say that, and I saw it myself, right? When I was watching Candy's lives at the time, they would come in the chat or whatever, and basically they were saying these lies, right? That Candy Grand Prix was trying to break into the library after hours, which was a complete bogus lie. And that was one of the other reasons that led to Candy being wrongfully swatted and, tackled to the ground, injured by the police, and brought up on bogus charges where she had to, where she has had court dates, right? And all this and stuff, and all this trauma and pain, right? As a result of this network and its lies, right? So, anyways, I'm going to go ahead and just post the proof in the chat once again, showing who Targeted Tony really is, right? You know, despite his threats in the chat to try to silence the truth. So this is who Targeted Tony is. He's a liar. He's one of these gang stalkers, right? In the network, right? The Red Triangle network that lies explicitly. I mean, he's been caught red-handed now. He can go ahead and try to silence the truth as much as he wants in the chat right now, but he's been caught red-handed. He explicitly called on these nodes to make up these lies to the sheriff's department in Gretna. And as a result of that, Candy was wrongfully arrested. She had explicit permission by the library administrative staff, right, and all that, to be there after hours to use Wi-Fi temporarily because she's homeless and was trying to, get some help and document what was going on at the time, right? So this network, as they operate through plausible deniability, saw this tiniest window of opportunity, right? The thinnest shreds of plausible deniability that they thought they could use at the time to make up this lie that she was breaking the law, that she was there trespassing after hours, and some of them even lied that she was breaking into the library. Now, when you lie to the police on the target, right, and tell them that the target is trying to break into the library, right? Clearly, that could lead to the target being severely injured or even killed. I mean, just watch recent police, webcam footage. This is a very serious matter. The police are known to be symbolically trigger happy, right? And when this network was explicitly lying on Candy, right, telling all these bogus lies, trespassing after hours, breaking into the library. Clearly, they were trying to get Candy either, it's pretty obvious what they were trying to accomplish by that. And ultimately, they wanted to effectively eliminate the target symbolically. And Targeted Tony has been caught red-handed. Yeah. So, anyways, you basically are trying to move the goalpost. That's what they're doing in the chat right now. They're trying to do this damage control, these manipulative tactics where, they are changing the issue from wrongfully calling the police, lying to the police, right? And trying to swat the target to this damage control script that, well, the reason that she was tackled to the ground or injured and all this and that and arrested isn't because we lied or whatever. No, that's bogus. Um, and actually, it's just complete damage control and narrative management cleanup that they are doing in the comments to obscure the fact that Targeted Tony, in his own words, encouraged this network to mass call the police sheriff's office because there were dozens of nodes watching at the time. Angie Peterson, PSA, the usual suspects were all in the chat, right? And Targeted Tony Los Angeles tells them, here's the number to the sheriff's office. And then, also on record, we have here, I have here showing proof that these network nodes will clearly lie to the police, right? I will now reference Ronald Soriano's video once again. The Ronald Soriano video once again. I'm going to read from this comment that Ronald left. This explicitly shows how this network lies to the police. So I'll read this comment now. He says, anyone want to call the Red Roof Inn? I think that's what it's called. It's next to a Waffle House. Say she's screaming and make up a story and tell them to call the cops and needs to get Baker acted. I want to do it, but I'd feel bad. I'm a Christian. So this demonstrates here how the network will explicitly call the police, lie, and get the target swatted, right? And potentially try to end their life as a result of these lies that they make up to the police, right? Yeah. So actually, the good thing though that exposed there is that they're running this typical, repetitive, predictable smear campaign, right? Dehumanization smear campaign that they always run in the comments that I'm living with mommy, right? Well, your network failed to make me homeless. Your network failed to make me in a vulnerable position where you would have more plausible deniable excuses to get me swatted and killed. So yeah, congratulations, your network failed. You never fully destabilized my home, my living situation, right? And all that, despite all of your attempts through Mario and these other infiltrators that were always, encouraging me to argue with my, parents or whatever and trying to ultimately destabilize me. You failed through infiltration of my family, through my brother, especially, right? Because he's in your network as well, right? And also, you failed through those means. So ultimately, I still have a stable home, right? You wanted me to be vulnerable. You want all targets to be vulnerable on the streets, living in their cars, living on the streets, so you can more up lies. And that's what this is demonstrating here. When the target is vulnerable and homeless, these gang stalkers can more easily make up lies to the police to get the target swatted and potentially killed, arrested, so on and so forth, because they do not have a stable address, right? And basically, they have more plausible deniability to, make up these lies to the police because the target will be in a much more vulnerable position when they're homeless, right? Yeah, and that was all scripted, by the way, because all that stuff with Nerve Gorilla, because where is Nerve Gorilla right now, right? Nerve Gorilla retired his character because he became too much of a liability after all of the contradictions in his official story, right? Where he was claiming that he was the grounded, rational, high IQ one, but he ended up claiming that Toby was a mentally stable, good person when it's now on record, according to your own network's official fiction, that she's guilty or whatever, being charged with felony stalking or whatever, and she's on record, making obvious death threats, right? And all this stuff. And claiming to hear voices in her head. So they retired that Nerve Gorilla character because of the extensive amount of documentation and videos I made dismantling his persona, right? And that whole Targeted Tony versus Nerve Gorilla was just kayfabe, right? Just like Nerve Gorilla versus Night Tiger Jedi was kayfabe. Um, and also, proof of this is Chief Handler's silence regarding my address. Chief Handler, as I showed in the last live stream on this channel, will gladly call the police and all this and that, right? On a network, or he'll not call the police, but post their address in Street View and all this stuff. Because network nodes like Tim Seekins and Brandon Q and Toby Reed are assets. They're actors. So there's no risk when he drops their address. Now, Chief Handler told me late last year, he said, all my threats are direct. Now, now all of a sudden he's a paper tiger, though, because when it comes to a real target like myself who has an actual identity, right, and all this stuff, well, he starts losing plausible deniability and the actions start looking more incriminating. They start looking optically worse for your network. So that explains that. And Tony versus Nerve Gorilla, like I said, obviously kayfabe. Targeted Tony plus Toby Reed plus Nerve Gorilla equals gang stalking red triangle. That's what it is. That's what it is. So let's see here. Yeah. So anyhow, they're just flooding the chat with their typical smear campaigns to falsely label me as a pathetic loser living in mommy's basement. Well, no, I just showed a receipt of my first $4,500 invoice payment to Hawkeye Dynamics for the training course, right? I'll be going to New Zealand in July, right? That's not a basement dwelling, mommy, loser, blah, 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 disinformation campaign that you are spamming in the chat. That is a documented record that I am competent. I'm planning a private scientific expedition to the McMurdo Dry Valleys in Antarctica, dispelling all of your network's lies pertaining to me being insane or all this stuff and not organized or whatever, this and that. All these lies your network comes up with. So I provided receipts and documentation to refute those claims. I will be in New Zealand in July unless your network tries to sabotage that, much like Targeted Tony, right? And the rest of the network swatted Candy Grand Prix. So will they swat me next? Will they come up with any number of lies to try to get my house raided? There is a non-zero chance of that, certainly by virtue of their anger and the fact that I continue to dismantle their narratives in real time, such as posting the evidence in the chat. I'll go ahead and post this Ronald Soriano evidence again, real quick. Well, you're not a genuine channel. You didn't just find me. You're one of these network nodes. You're one of these actors running disinformation campaigns, smear campaigns against the target. Any excuse that you come up with is just acting persona based. So you're here to try to smear me and delegitimize my credibility. That's all you're doing. Here is an example, though. I'll post in the chat now. Yeah, anyhow, this live stream is addressing Targeted Tony. So what do you have to say about Targeted Tony? I dropped the receipts in the chat, clearly showing that he encouraged these network nodes to contact the sheriff's office and tell a lie that Candy Grand Prix was trespassing or breaking the law when she clearly wasn't. I provided evidence of that through Candy's own community post and the letter that she had explicitly showing permission by the library staff that she had the right to be there to use the Wi-Fi after hours. That's the plausible deniable excuse they're trying to use, is that she was there after hours breaking the law, and therefore they had every right in the world to call the police. That's the narrative that they're using to justify that and downplay this and obscure the fact that Tony clearly called on Candy Grand Prix to be swatted. Why don't you address that and instead of trying to divert and deflect attention away from the topic of this live stream? You're trying to change the subject because you're doing narrative management and narrative damage control. You're doing counterintelligence in the comments. Well, any type of dehumanization smear campaign that you run in the comments, okay, go ahead and say it over and over again. The pattern just becomes more blatantly obvious and repetitive. The more you say, I'm a loser, I'm pathetic, living with mommy, gay, or whatever, you say all these like dehumanization smear campaigns in the comments, the pattern of conduct, the pattern in general just becomes more painfully obvious to anybody that's, watching for the first time, anybody that's analyzing this as an independent observer, right? Is seeing the pattern of conduct in the comments. And it's clearly a smear campaign meant to discredit me and dehumanize me instead and obscure the topic at hand that, you know, I've been going over in this live stream, that Targeted Tony Los Angeles called on Candy Grand Prix to be swatted based on a lie. He lied. Targeted Tony lied. Tony said Candy was at the library breaking the law. He called on the other red triangle nodes like Angie Peterson, PSA, and the rest of the usual suspects in the chat to call the police and all that. He gave them the sheriff's number, right? And told them to basically make up a lie that she was breaking the law when the letter from the library staff clearly shows otherwise. So, anyways, I'm going to go ahead and post evidence of that in the chat once again because they are flooding the chat and trying to obscure that evidence. And this is also why they flooded the comments of the original video, right? So, anyways, here's the post. Here's the video, rather. So you see how desperately these network nodes have to flood the comments, right? To try to do their damage control in real time because they have to do narrative management in real time because now I'm controlling the narrative. I'm live streaming in real time, exposing their lies, doing a live stream where, YouTube favors these more too, as far as the algorithm can reach new people, right? So for any new people potentially watching, I highly encourage you to check out the documented timeline, Tony's own words, Tony's own calls, to the network nodes for them to call the police. It's all on record. No matter how many narrative damage control spins, no matter how many deflections and diversion tactics they flood the comments with, no matter how many intimidation threats, it does not change the pattern of conduct. It doesn't change their lies. It doesn't change Tony's lies. It doesn't change the fact that Candy was wrongfully arrested. It doesn't change the fact that this network calls the police, lies to the police to get the target harmed, injured, or worse. Harmed basically like Candy was as a result of these lies. She was tackled to the ground by the police because this network lied to the police and told them that Candy was breaking the law, that Candy was breaking into the library. Candy explicitly had permission to be at the library. Reference the letter and the video I just linked. This is a documented reality. Targeted Tony has been caught red handed as a liar and a network node calling on the other gang stalkers in the sticky network, in the gang stalking network to get the target swatted, to get Candy swatted. That's what happened. Anyhow, they can go ahead and say whatever they want. The documented timeline stands, right? They can go ahead and try to desperately change the subject and deflect attention away from targeted Tony's own words, targeted Tony's own actions. I'll go ahead and post that again in the chat. I'll go ahead and post that again in the chat, right? Because they're trying to flood the chat and obscure the truth. So go ahead and yeah, they have to do their damage control. They always have to do their damage control in the comments when some of the most serious or sensitive issues are brought up. Just as I'm continually referencing the material, and they keep flooding the chat, and they keep trying to obscure the facts and targeted Tony's own words. Targeted Tony clearly said, call the sheriff's office, blah, 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 blah. Tell them she's breaking the law, or basically because she's breaking the law, right? Which is bullshit. Read the letter from the library staff. Targeted Tony is clearly trying to obscure the truth and run damage control basically in the comments, isn't he, right? Under this fake account, presumably, right? So him and this other network node, they have two network nodes in the chat right now, flooding the chat, doing damage control, posting death emojis, right? To try to intimidate me into silence, right? Intimidation theater, just like Patricia Jerome's Saint Expedite blood ritual, right? Yeah, yeah, okay. And just crazy, right? How their network nodes are looking more and more like paper tigers, such as Chief Handler, who conveniently, has a double standard, right? Who will, gladly post, other network nodes, home views, right? Their street views and all this, like Tim Seekins, who is a gang stalker in the Red Triangle Network, who's an actor, who's a persona, right? Toby Reed, same deal. Brandon Q, right? Anybody's address basically at this point is showing on his channel is an actor. And the reason he can so carelessly post their address and make such threats like this is because there's no risk involved, because he's just uh, performing kayfabe with other members of his network. So I'm going to grab a drink here quickly, and I will be back in just a minute. And of course, they will flood the chat while I'm gone, I presume, with their damage control scripts, right? Because that's what they're doing right now. They're doing every sort of smear campaign possible in the comments to obscure his own words, targeted Tony's own lies, right? That incriminate him. So, and indict him, right? So I go ahead and post the video again while I'm gone, right? For 1 minute here or so. Yeah, I think your little pizza parties are going to be coming to an end here soon, symbolically. You know, your little corrupt pizza groups, right? Do you want me to show some videos referencing leaked emails, right? That go back to what, 2016, when your network originally got exposed? Yeah, on record. Yeah, Elon has been saying in recent times about those claims that were made by your fake Masonic media, right? Symbolic media, right? That theory had been debunked, right? So let's see how that turns out for you guys here in the future. So here they are continuing to flood the chat and all this nonsense with these dehumanization smear campaigns to obscure Tony's own words that indict him from that live stream that he took part in early 2022 or 2025 rather, you know, where he clearly called on the network to call the sheriff's office in Gretna, right, and get Candy wrongfully swatted. So no matter what he says in the chat, no matter how many deflections and diversions they come up with in the chat, it does not change the timeline. It does not change the documented record. Targeted Tony lied. Targeted Tony called on Candy Grand Prix to be swatted in front of dozens of other gang stalkers, right? Other gang stalkers in the Red Triangle Network. So it's all on record. Go ahead and try to run as many damage control scripts as you want in the comments. It doesn't change anything. It will never change the actual documented record at hand. So okay, so here they are. This is their last ditch played, is just to flood the comments with a bunch of dehumanization smears regarding their typical script that they run about, you know, people being forced this and forced that and whatever else. I mean, it's obviously just another smear campaign to deflect and divert attention away from their obvious swatting, Tony's lies, right? I'll go ahead and post that in the chat again. I'll just post it a bunch of times, right? I'll just post it a bunch of times, right? So it can be at the top of everything. Right. Here's one time. Here's another time. Here's the documented record. Here is Tony lying on Candy Grand Prix, claiming that she was breaking the law and getting her, and he was lying, claiming that Candy was breaking the law, that she was trespassing at the library after hours, and he called on these other gang stalkers in the Red Triangle Network to call up the sheriff's office and get Candy Grand Prix swatted. That's basically what happened. Here it is. Here's the proof. I'm going to post it in the chat again. Here's the proof. It's in the chat. Here's the evidence. Here's Tony's own words. And here's the letter. At the end of the video, you can see the letter clearly showing that Candy clearly had the right to be at the library after hours to use the Wi-Fi or whatever limited services they had available. Here it is. Here's the proof. Here, I'm also gonna post the Ronald Soriano proof again, right? All over the chat, right? Okay, just a second. So I'm providing receipts, documentation here, and all that, and all they have is smear campaigns and all that, right? Here's Ronald Soriano, a network node, telling the other members to make up a lie to the police so Candy can get swatted. Here it is. Here's the evidence. Oh, I just dropped the receipts again for any new viewers that happen to be tuning in for the first time. Please check this out. Please check out this documented timeline, these documented receipts showing that this network does call on the target to be swatted because they want the target to get arrested or potentially wrongfully harmed by the police, right? Because everybody knows how trigger happy the police can be symbolically. So that's the network's intention, is to get the target harmed, right? Here it is. Proof. Here's the proof that the Red Triangle gang stalking network calls on targeted individuals. Like they openly, explicitly, they're just out in the open about it. Ronald Soriano saying, "Oh yeah, uh, go ahead and make up a lie to the police. She's at the Red Roof Inn." This is their pattern of conduct. This is what they do. So here it is. Here's the proof that the you know Red Triangle network lies to the police to get the target swatted. Proof that the Red Triangle network lies to the police to get the target swatted. Proof that the Red Triangle network lies to the police to get the target swatted. Proof that the Red Triangle network lies to the police to get the target swatted. Reference Ronald Soriano's own words in that screenshot. It is 100% proof, and anything you say right now is just a deflection to, basically obscure that fact. So they're just making up a bunch of lies and smear campaigns in the comments right now. I will go ahead and post the documented proof of your network's lies and actions, Tony's own words, Ronald Soriano's own words, right? Well, you continue to post veiled death threats and all this other stuff, intimidation threats to silence the truth, right? So let me get this posted. And notice how they'll just say anything to obscure the truth and divert the truth, because that's what I mean. Maybe you should look into the symbolic Masonic diversion tactics. I think there are a few dozen of those, aren't there? So it might explain the pattern of conduct, right, in the comments that we're seeing, right? There it is. Proof the Red Triangle Network lies to the police. Proof the Red Triangle Network lies to the police. Let me get this next one here. Tony, right? Let's look at Tony's pizza optics. Let's look at Tony's pizza optics. Tony has a Los Angeles County Sheriff's tattoo on his bottom lip, right? Let's get that in the comments. Like, here we go. Targeted Tony Los Angeles has a Los Angeles County Sheriff's tattoo on his bottom lip. And look what their emblem is. Look what their symbol is, right? It's a pizza network symbol, isn't it? Let's see what that is. I'll post that evidence again. Targeted Tony Los Angeles has a Los Angeles County Sheriff's tattooed on his bottom lip, and it has a very suspicious looking triangle symbol on it that I believe was identified by the FBI as a potential symbol that exploits vulnerable groups. A type of symbolic pizza symbol, right? There's evidence of that once again. Targeted Tony Los Angeles has a Los Angeles County Sheriff's tattooed on his bottom lip. Targeted Tony Los Angeles called on the Red Triangle Network to make up a lie to the police, and tell them that Candy Grand Prix was breaking the law, which she clearly wasn't. The letter from the library staff proves that Targeted Tony is a liar. So let's go ahead and I'm gonna go ahead and post the proof of this in the chat, right? Go ahead and post this in the chat. Here's the proof in the chat that Targeted Tony Los Angeles lied that Candy Grand Prix was breaking the law, and he called on Candy Grand Prix to the rest of the gang stalking network to get swatted. So here we go. Let's post the proof again for anybody that might just be tuning in right now for the first time. Right? Here is the proof, and they're going to try to change the subject as much as they can in the chat to obscure the truth that Targeted Tony Los Angeles is a gang stalker that called on Candy Grand Prix to be swatted, and it was all based on a lie. Dozens of Red Triangle nodes were in the chat, like Angie Peterson, PSA, and the usual suspects. And Targeted Tony Los Angeles gave the number to the sheriff's office in Louisiana. So here's the proof of that again. Here's the proof. Here's the proof again. Here's the proof again. That Targeted Tony Los Angeles called on the Red Triangle Network nodes to make up a lie to the police and get the target swatted, in this case, Candy Grand Prix. And the optics of this, when gang stalkers like Targeted Tony call on make up these lies, right? Like, oh, the target's breaking the law, right? This can, in theory, obviously lead to very serious harm, as we've seen with Candy, right? And it can lead to much worse, things as well, because the target can potentially even be killed as a result of how symbolically trigger happy, the police are. So, these are the dangers of making up lies to the police. So let me go ahead and post this proof in the chat again. No, I'm clearly not mentally ill, as evidence of my first invoice payment. Receipts of that were posted in the chat today. My correspondences, or however that's put, with the U.S. Department of State. I am highly competent. I am planning a private, non-governmental, scientific-based expedition to Antarctica. I am funding this myself. I am planning this myself. I am going through the steps, the bureaucracy, the training. That is not some that is not those are not the actions of somebody that is mentally ill. That is a smear campaign that you are running within the comments to try to discredit me desperately. So here it is. Proof that Targeted Tony Los Angeles lies to the uh, pretty much calls on the Red Triangle Network, call up the police based on lies. Targeted Tony is a liar. So they're running this disinformation smear campaign to obscure and deflect attention away from the record on hand. Now, I've posted the link many times in the chat showing that Targeted Tony clearly called on these network nodes to call the police, right? Wrongfully call the police on Candy and get her swatted. And it was all based on the lie that she was apparently at the library or whatever, breaking the law, which was bogus bullshit. So, anyways, I'll go ahead and post the evidence to show that in the chat once again. Proof Targeted Tony is a liar. Proof Tony is a swatter. Proof Tony is Red Triangle. There you go. There's the proof. Now I'm going to actually show the proof that Tony works with Angie Peterson. Get this posted here. Here's the proof, and we all know Angie Peterson is a sticky TT6 moderator. Proof targeted Tony is red triangle. Angie Peterson is a sticky TT6 moderator. The sticky TT6 moderators and sticky red triangle gang stalkers were all over Tony's live stream from early last year when he was making up these lies and when he was calling on the network to swat Candy Grand Prix. Here it is. I will post this evidence again. Here we go. Proof that Tony is red triangle. Proof that Tony and Angie Peterson self promote, cross promote each other, right? Proof that Tony and Angie Peterson work together, right? That they coordinate smear campaigns together. Here's the evidence, proof of that I'm posting now in the chat. Here's the evidence. So Shanice DGB33, you're obviously one of these red triangle shows that's flooding the chat and performing narrative damage control. Why don't you address some of the information that's on hand? Because you're trying to obscure that fact, deflect and divert attention away from Tony's own words, Tony's own pattern of behavior, Tony's own lies. So I don't want to hear about any of your nonsense in this chat right now until and anyone else can legitimately address the evidence and documented timelines and facts at hand, because otherwise it's nothing more than a smear campaign. Here's the proof once again. Tony and Angie Peterson work together. 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 Tony and Angie Peterson cross promote each other. Tony and Angie Peterson cross promote each other. And Angie Peterson is clearly basically the head sticky TT6 moderator, right? Dozens of these network nodes were in Tony's live stream last year when he was calling on the network to swat Candy Grand Prix when he handed out the sheriff's number. And as a result of that, Candy got wrongfully arrested because this network lies, right? They lie to the police. Now I will show evidence once again of targeted Tony's pizza optics, right? Because Tony has a Los Angeles County Sheriff's tattooed on the bottom of his lip. Tony has a symbolic pizza emblem tattooed on the bottom of his lip. He have a symbolic pizza emblem tattooed on the bottom of his lip. Why does Tony have a symbolic pizza emblem tattooed on the bottom of his lip? You know, look at what the FBI or whatever back in 2016, if you remember, like the original WikiLeaks information surrounding these issues, which I'll go into detail later. I'm going to go tell about that later, obviously, and we're gonna, investigate that further. But why does Tony have a Los Angeles County Sheriff tattooed on his bottom lip? Hmm. Well, symbolically, you should look up what WikiLeaks, right? The WikiLeaks information in 2016 and what the FBI has to say about these symbols. Very interesting optically. And why does Tony have a Los Angeles County Sheriff tattooed on his bottom lip that's symbolically related to pizza? Why does he have a sheriff's tattoo on his bottom lip? Why does he have his bottom lip? Why does he have a sheriff's tattoo on his bottom lip? Why does he have a sheriff's tattoo on his bottom lip, right? And what is the emblem, right? Right? Donovan Schuldis, one of your own fake network nodes, gave that away. I guess he threw you under the bus. I guess he tripped over his own disinformation campaign, right? Because you have a little LA County Sheriff's tattoo on your bottom lip, don't you, Tony? So let me go ahead and post that again, right? Why does Tony have a sheriff's tattoo, right? Why is this network talking about sacrificing people to Moloch when Moloch is a pagan god of child sacrifice, right? Why is that the case? Why are they continually doing this in the name of trolling, right? Where they're bringing up, Moloch and such. Okay, so here's the share. Why don't you check that up with the rest of your fake network that already had to throw you under the bus because you were already too much of a liability, right? With your sheriff's tattoo on the bottom of your lip. So let's get to the next issue at hand here. Targeted Tony Los Angeles coordinates smear campaigns, right? And works with the Red Triangle Network. Here you go. Here's first piece of proof of this. Targeted Tony and Angie Peterson cross promote each other. Targeted Tony, right, and Angie Peterson are friends, right? They cross promote each other's information. Damage control, damage limitation. They're flooding the chat because they have to perform damage control in real time. It's interesting stuff though because they didn't even get their scripts right. They don't have their scripts ready from their handlers, so they have to perform this on the spot basically. So here they are flooding the chat with their damage control. Well, if you don't care about if you don't care about Candy being swatted, that just shows that you're a morally bankrupt gang stalker. Obviously, here trying to divert and deflect attention away from the issue at hand. Targeted Tony. I will once again now post in the chat the proof that Targeted Tony Los Angeles is working with the Red Triangle Network, such as Angie Peterson, who is a Red Triangle moderator. Angie Peterson, Red Triangle moderator. Targeted Tony in Los Angeles, right? They cross promote each other. They love each other. They work together. They hype each other up, right? Angie was in Tony's live stream from a year ago, right? Here it is. Tony and Angie Peterson, coordinating with each other, right? Here they are coordinating with each other. Angie Peterson and Tony coordinating with each other. For anybody tuning in for the first time, I highly encourage you to please check out that material, cross-reference this documented material. There is a clear pattern here showing, you know, their behavior. So here we go. Here you go, trying to change the subject from your own words and documented timeline, right? Your own words where you called on the network notes to call the sheriff's office, lie on Candy, and get her swatted. That's what's on record here. What's also record, what I'm posting in the chat, cross promote each other. Angie Peterson shouts out Tony, and Angie Peterson was in Tony's live stream where he called on Candy to be swatted. Here we go. Obscure anything possible, run as much damage control as possible. But here's the documented timeline that I continue to reference as I'm posting it in the chat. Tony plus Angie Peterson equals red triangle. Here you go. Here's the proof. I'll post it again now. Here's the evidence. It's already documented on record. Go ahead and run as many, your campaigns as you'd like. It doesn't change the timeline at all. It doesn't change anything. So all you have are instead of addressing the facts, all you can do is baselessly dehumanize and smear Candy Grand Prix's good name, right? As she documents your crimes, your lies, and the patterns of your behavior. That's all you've got, right? To obscure the truth regarding Tony's own words that indict him as a gang stalker that called on Candy to be swatted based on a lie. Reference the video I'm about to share once again in the chat. Proof that targeted Tony is a liar and a gang stalker that got Candy Grand Prix swatted. Here we go. Here's the proof. Proof that targeted Tony swats. Here's the evidence. No, I'm actually just gonna go ahead and show the documented record and timeline without you trying to run your counterintelligence diversion tactics and smear campaign. I'm just gonna go and show any live viewers that are here, right? Timeline. Here it is. These are Tony's own words. Nothing they say in the chat will change this fact. Nothing they say in the chat will change the facts and the timelines of Tony's own words and behavior and actions, right? That indict him as a Red Triangle gang stalker that swatted Candy Graham free wrong. So that's all they can do is run with their usual scripted smear campaigns, falsely labeling Candy a scammer, Candy a monster, right? It's all lies. It's the same script. It's the same scripted smear campaigns that we've seen 1,000 times now. It's just loop. That's all they have are loops because they have to flood the chat in real time with counterintelligence. Because as you can see right now, it appears 10 people are watching. Are two of those people or one of the one person real potentially watching for the first time that wants to reference this material, that's what they're worried about. That's why they flood the chat in real time and do damage control. Here is the documented proof. Targeted Tony, targeted Tony's own words that indict him as a gang stalker that swatted Candy Grand Prix. Targeted Tony's own words. Here they are once again. Targeted Tony calling on the network nodes to call the police and get her swatted. Here's the evidence once again, and now they're running this another smear campaign, another loop, another script in the comments where they're deflecting and diverting attention away from oh wow, his mom has money or he's entitled. That's a script they've been running for years now too. But no matter how many times you lie or whatever, or smear me or try to delegitimize me or discredit me in the comments, that does not change your own words. That does not change your pattern of conduct. Here's the evidence once again. Targeted Tony lies, right? Tells a lie that Candy was breaking the law, and his network used that as a plausible, deniable justification to swat Candy and get her, arrested and all this stuff when she was at the library simply using the Wi-Fi. Shortly after they had closed or whatever about a year ago. So So let me see here. So now just more dehumanization smears in the comments, right? Anything to divert attention away from the fact that Targeted Tony called on the network node to make up a lie to the police, right? Yeah. Here it is. Here's the proof once again. No, nobody's insane here. We're just rationally documenting your crimes and your lies. That's what we're doing. Here's the evidence of that once again. Here are your own words, right? Here are Tony's own words, right? Now I'm gonna go ahead and post the proof once again, right? Showing that the network lied to the police to get the target swatted, right? Here's the proof of that again. So here it is. Here it is. I'm just gonna go ahead and now post this in the chat once again. This is proof that the Red Triangle Network lies to the police to get the target swatted. Here's the proof that the Red Triangle Network will lie to the police to get the target swatted. Here's the proof that the Red Triangle Network will lie to the police to get the target swatted. Also reference Tony's own words from the previous video that I've been linking in this chat and that I've been referring to this whole stream. Here we go again. This is a documented timeline. And remember, Ronald posted these words, right? Posted this comment, this during the same time period in early 2025 when these very egregious swatting calls, right, were being made by nodes like Tony, right? Yeah, just more dehumanization smear scripts. You're just looping. You're looping the same dehumanization smear scripts. It doesn't change anything from the official timeline. It doesn't change anything from, what's on record with Tony's own words. Here is proof that the network will lie to the police to get the target swatted. Here, I'll go ahead and make a new comment to this. Proof the Red Triangle gang stalkers will lie to the police, right? That's on record here. I post this again. Hey, proof. There is the network's own words. There they are. There they are. Here are the network's own words. This is how mentally deranged they are. This is how dangerous they are. They will lie to the police to potentially get the target killed. We know how symbolically trigger happy the police are. Look at modern webcam footage from police encounters. This is what the network wants. The network wants the target eliminated. So how do they do that? By, calling the police, making up lies like Targeted Tony did, right, a year ago, which is on record. No, I don't take any medications. That's another dehumanization smear campaign and a desperate attempt to discredit me. It's a scripted line that you keep running. You keep running with the same scripted smear campaigns. It's obvious. So here they are just flooding the chat, and it's painfully obvious to anybody that's, watching long enough to see the pattern recycle over and over again, them loop the same dehumanization smear scripts, the same delegitimization smear scripts to discredit myself, right? It's very obvious what they're doing. They're not engaging in good faith. They're not engaging in good intent. They don't have any genuine curiosity. All they have is the same scripts that they loop over and over again. Here is the evidence that the Red Triangle Network lies to the police. There's the evidence once again. Proof that the Red Triangle Network lies to the police. Proof to the net proof that the Red Triangle Network lies to the police. No, you're not here in good intent. You're here to run a smear campaign and divert and deflect attention away from Tony's actions and the network's actions as they pertain to swatting. Why don't you address that? But I know you won't because you're just here to run damage control and counterintelligence in the comments. And for anybody with basically that's been around for 2 seconds can see the script that you do loop over and over again. Now I'm gonna post Tony's own words in the comments, right? Those Tony's words, right? Proof Tony is a liar and a swatter. This is what he is. This is what Tony is. He's a liar and a swatter. Tony is a liar and a swatter. Tony is a liar and a swatter. There it is. There's the proof, and I'm about to post it again, right? Make sure I have the link here set up correctly, right? So I can go ahead and post this proof again for anybody that's potentially watching now as a new viewer, an independent observer, somebody that's, doesn't know the full story here. I will go ahead and post that proof once again, right? Here it is. Your same scripts over and over again, dehumanization scripts to discredit the obvious truth, the patterns that are on a documented record now. Here's the record. Here's the record. This is not Chat GPT. These are your own words, Tony. This is not AI. these are your own words, Tony. It is a letter from the library staff clearly showing that, Candy had permission to be at the library. That's what you're trying desperately to deflect and divert attention away from. I am not reading from any ChatGPT script here. I am speaking the truth and showing the documented timeline. You are the one that's flooding the chat with a damage control script. Yeah, and that's just what you're doing. You're just here to try to divert and deflect attention away from that's what all the nodes are doing in the chat right now. They're coming up with any excuse to change the subject away from the documented timeline and make it all about how bad Candy is because of whatever smear campaign they're coming up with, right? Where they falsely label Candy as mean or a scammer and all this and that. And it's all bogus, right? To basically protect the network node, that network node being Tony. Here's Tony's lies. I'm posting Tony's lies in the chat. I'm posting Tony's own swatting threats in the chat. Here they are. Here's where he called on the network to call the sheriff's office in Gretna. Here it is. Here it is. Here's the proof. And isn't it interesting that you symbolically have your 33 in your name? It was Toby Reed who had the 33 in the name of her Shadow Violence 33 account, where she said, you know, anonymous is here to shoot to kill and all that. And, you know, of course, all the times in the documented timeline, I have clearly shown where Toby Reed was making these death threats, right, with the number 33 attached to that. So very interesting optics there, isn't it? Very interesting optics. Here are Tony's own words. What do you have to say about Tony's own words? Whoever this fake account is, Shanice, what do you have to say about Tony's own words and lies where he called on the sheriff's office or where he called on the red triangle nodes to call the police? Oh, yeah, here we go. Proof that targeted Tony called on the network node to make up a lie to the police that can't breaking the law and trespassing, right? Sure it is. Any kind of plausible, deniable excuse or lie you have to come up with. Here it is. Tony, right, called on the network nodes to, you know, call the sheriff's phone number. Why don't you just listen to his own words, you know? No matter how much they flood the chat with these diversion tactics, it will not change the documented time. Here it is. Here it is. This is the documented timeline that you can't distort, that you can't change. Tony's own words indict him. Here they are, just having a scripted, smear campaign in the comments. This isn't genuine interaction. This is counterintelligence that they are engaged in the comments to try to discredit the documented timeline that's on record of Tony's own words that indict him and prove that he is a liar and a gang stalker that called on Candy to be swatted. Here it is. Here, well, this live stream is about Tony. This live stream isn't about you. So if you're not interested in talking about Tony, what are you doing here other than running a smear campaign, right? Here are Tony's own words. Now let's go back to another piece of evidence here. Proof that Tony and Angie Peterson worked together. Here's the proof. About to post it in the chat. No matter how many times you post the veiled threats or the smear campaigns in the comments, it will not change the documented timeline. It will not change Tony's own word, no matter what you do or say or make up in the chat. So there's the proof, right? And they have to desperately flood the chat now because I'm providing receipts, right, of their actions, right? Their cross promotion. Here now I'm providing receipts, right, in the chat to prove that Targeted Tony and Angie Peterson cross promote one another. They work together, they amplify each other's messages, and that's what they do. Here's the proof of that. I'm posting evidence now in the chat to show that Targeted Tony and Angie Peterson, the main pretty much the main sticky TT6 moderator, cross promote and work with each other. Proof that Targeted Tony is in the Red Triangle Network. He is part of this gang stalking network that made up the lie that Candy was breaking the law, and that was justification, according to him, for their plausible deniable script to get Candy swatted. Candy did get swatted, and it was all based on lies, wasn't it? So there they are, just posting the intimidation, fear, uh, mongering, or whatever that is in the chat, the intimidation scripts, right? But here's the documented timeline. No matter how much they try to threaten and obscure that, it doesn't change the fact. It doesn't change Tony's own words. It doesn't change Angie Peterson's own words and Angie Peterson's own actions. All it does is prove that they have to desperately flood the chat to obscure the documented timeline and proof, which is exactly what they're doing right now. Here's the proof once again. And I will reiterate that I have to continually post these links in the chat because they are desperately trying to flood out the truth, the documented timeline, because they want to cover it up. They want to cover up their lies and their crimes and things of this nature. So that's why they flood the chat, right? Here they are. Yeah, yes, this is what they do. They admit what they are when they are cornered with logic, right, and documented receipts. So here it is. They go ahead and continue to do their theater in the chat, but here it is. Targeted Tone and Angie Peterson work together. I'm going to Antarctica. You all are staying in this little Masonic nightmare that you've created that's built on lies, right? I'm going to Antarctica. I have training to do. I have things that transcend your lies, right? And your narratives. I'm going to Antarctica. What you're going to do is continue to work for this network, making up lies, right? That can get targets harmed or even worse. So it's on record that that's what you do. Yeah. Go ahead and post another million dehumanization smear campaigns in the comments. It won't change anything about your own words or documented timeline. All it's going to do is prove my point that you're running on scripts. You are running on scripts, but here is the documented fact. Targeted Tony Los Angeles and Angie Peterson work together. They cross promote each other. They cross promote each other. Here it is. Here it is, the proof. Oh, I don't know what I'm talking about. Well, I'm just posting Targeted Tony's own words and showing that they are a lie based on the documents, right? For example, Candy Grand Prix's letter from the administrative staff at the library staff that is notarized and signed, showing that she had clear permission to be there after hours to use the Wi-Fi temporarily and all that to get help and, speak her message, right? Because and document your network's threats. That's what's going on there, right? So, yeah, anyways, here's the proof once again. Do you have, Shanice 33, do you have anything to say about Tony and Angie clearly working together? Shanice 33, do you have anything to say about Targeted Tony and Angie Peterson's clear collaboration? 33, Shanice 33, do you have anything to say about Targeted Tony and Angie Peterson's clear collaboration? Because this is what is being discussed right now in the live stream as much as you try to obscure and deflect attention away from that. Here it is. Here's the proof once again. 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 Oh, and I'm documenting your threats in real time, Shanice 33. Shanice 33. I'm documenting your threats and intimidation tactics in real time. There's a public record. All of this is being made a public record of, right? Just like Tony's own words that indict him, right? So this is being there's a record of this being made, just like the record that shows that Targeted Tony and Angie Peterson work together, right? No, I'm not stupid. I'm just simply documenting the facts and the timelines that are showing the pattern of behavior and the logic behind that is clear as day. It's documented on record. Well, okay. How about you check them out? I've only posted the link a bunch of times. Why don't you pause the live stream and come back to me once you reference that material and give me your thoughts because that's what we are, that's what's being discussed right now in this live stream, not your diversion tactics. This is what's important at hand. Read the title of this live stream. This live stream is not about you. This live stream is to document targeted Tony's pattern of behavior, his own words that indict him as a gang stalker that called on the other network nodes to call the police and get Candy wrongfully swatted, and it was all based on a lie that Candy was breaking the law, okay? So anyhow, you were not nice to me, you came in here, and all of them are just running this typical smear campaign. I don't even know who you are, and I know what you're doing is just to deflect and divert attention away from the issue at hand. So, if you're not interested in talking about the pattern of conduct concerning Tony, then what are you doing here other than to run your scripted loop in the comments as a means to divert attention away from the facts at hand? Here we go. Targeted Tony's own words where here, I'll just go ahead and type this out real quick. Here we go. Okay, so there it is, there it is, and as you can see, they are desperately flooding the chat right now. Desperate attempt at damage control. Isn't it so glaringly, painfully obvious? Isn't it glaringly, painfully obvious to anybody that has stuck around for half a second, they can see that the intent behind these comments is to flood the chat and to dehumanize the myself, right, the messenger here, that's simply showing the documented timeline and facts. So here we go again. I'm gonna post it in the chat. Here it is. No matter how many intimidation tactics, no matter how much intimidation theater in the form of emojis and satanic imagery and symbolism you post, it will not change Tony's own words. It will not change Tony's own swatting. It will not change the fact that Andy clearly had permission to be at the library. Nothing you say will change that, no matter how many smear campaigns you make up. Yeah. So anyhow, here is the documented timeline. Anyways, that's your script that you're running because you don't wanna engage in Tony's own pattern of behavior. You just wanna come here and run a smear campaign and flood the comments with disinformation and scripts to make the target look bad, but you don't want to engage with the actual documents and timelines. That's why your pattern of conduct is obvious. That's why it's obvious that you are coming here with ill intent, and you are not here to honestly engage with the facts. In fact, you continually ignore them. Here's the evidence once again. You're looping the same scripts, and it's apparent to everybody watching. It's painfully obvious that you're looping the same smear scripts over and over again. Here it is. Here it is, and you got 33 in your name, just like Toby Reed's Shadow Violence 33 account, right? I'm gonna go ahead and post evidence of that now. Yeah, because you keep flooding the chat with, that 33, right? I'm gonna go ahead and post evidence of that now in the chat. Toby Reed's threats with the Shadow Violence 33 account. She used the Shadow Violence 33 account to threaten me, right? So I go back here, I'm gonna find the video. Yeah, there's just so much documentation now that sometimes it's hard to find it, right? Let's see here. This is, less than 1 minute. This video is less than 1 minute. This video is less than 1 minute, and go ahead and post this in the chat. I'm sure they flooded it with a million messages by now. Here it is. Here's the documented proof that Toby on her Shadow Violence 33 account threatened me, right? Here are the explicit threats from Toby Reed's Shadow Violence 33 account, right? Here it is. I just post this in the chat, show evidence, documented timeline and proof. Yeah, just looping the same dehumanization smears. Here it is. Here's the pattern of conduct, right? And many, many nodes in your network flooding the chat. 33, 33 this, 33 that, right? Here we go. I'm gonna go ahead and get another piece of evidence here. Like, I'm gonna go ahead and just post the proof once again. More times for anybody just shouting at just tuning in. Yep, just flooding the chat with your usual scripts. That's all you got. That's all you got is damage control. Here it is, Shadow Violence 33. Here it is, Shadow Violence 33's threats, right? Here it is. Anyways, here we go. I'm just gonna get back on subject now, right? Talk about Tony, right? And as you can see, their special interest nodes, right, have to flood the chat continuously for damage control to protect the network. Here it is, Tony's own words that indict him. Yeah. So here's the evidence. Once again, I'm going to go ahead and link it in the chat for anybody that happens to be right here. I go ahead and post that evidence in the chat. Here's the evidence, right? Targeted Tony's own words indict him as a gang stalker that lies on the target, in this case, Candy Green, to get her swatted. He came up with a lie. He was caught red-handed. He told the lie that she was breaking the law, that she was trespassing or whatever, and plausible, deniable excuse to go ahead and call the police, right? He gave the sheriff's number, and Candy was swatted, and Candy has to face bogus charges, right? Here we go. Here's the proof of that once again. And the network nodes, of course, continue to flood the chat, with their smears and deflections to obscure Tony's own words. Here are Tony's own words and lies that got Candy swatted effectively, right? Here they are. Tony's pattern of conduct. Here it is. Here it is. Tony's own words and lies got Candy swatted, right? Tony's own words that got swatted. He clearly made up a lie, told this network to call the police. You know, it's on record. No matter how much they flood the chat, it will not change his obvious lies and pattern of conduct, right? So here it is. No, I'm not in a network that, like Tony, right, in the Red Triangle network that makes up lies to the police. You're the one that seems to be trying to obscure and deflect attention away from the issue at hand. The evidence that I continually link in the chat, right? Here it is. Here it is. Here it is. Oh, calling out the symbolism, right? Continued pattern of symbolism as it pertains to death threats. That's all I'm doing. Here it is. Here's the evidence, and you know what? No matter what anybody says about me, it will not change the pattern of conduct, and all you're doing is running lies anyway to deflect and divert away from the fact that, you know, Tony lied or whatever, called on this network to call the police wrongfully on Candy. This is how your network behaves. So here's the evidence, right? Here's the evidence. Here's the evidence. Here's the evidence. Once Okay, I will check on the quality of the mic. All right, just checking on the quality of the microphone there real quick, and it seems like everything is all good. That was just another smear campaign that the gang stalkers are coming up with to try to derail the conversation, right? So let me go ahead and post the evidence in the chat once again, right? Because they are now trying to flood the chat to cover up their own crimes and lies, right? Their own, criminal conduct. So I'm gonna go ahead and post that evidence in the chat once again, showing that the Red Triangle Network lies to the police to get the target swatted. So there you go. I'm gonna post this evidence enough times in the chat so people can see it without them flooding out them without them trying to flood and obscure the truth. So this is all on record here. These were the network's own words during the same time frame, right? When Targeted Tony, around the same time frame, early 2025, when Targeted Tony had done that live stream and called on the other network nodes to call the police and get Candy Grand Prix swatted. That is what's on record. That's the documented timeline. Here's the documented timeline once again for anybody that is now tuning in. They can see a clear pattern of conduct that's on record and here's the evidence, right? Please feel free to pause the live stream, right? And reference this material. Proof the gang stalking network lies to the police. Proof the gang stalking network lies to the police. I will read Ronald Soriano's own words now. Ronald Soriano said, anyone want to call the Red Roof Inn? I think that's what it's called. It's next to a Waffle House. Say she's screaming and make up a story, make up a lie, right? Make up a story and tell them to call the cops, the police, right? Call the cops. And needs to get Baker acted. I want to do it, but I'd feel bad. I'm a Christian. So I'll go ahead and post this evidence in the chat. Once again, here's the proof that the Red Triangle Network lies to the police. Here we go. Here's the proof. Here's the evidence that here's the proof that the gang stalking network lies to the police. Here's the proof that the gang stalking network lies to the police to get the target swatted. Here's the proof. Here's the documented evidence, which they will try to obscure and deflect attention away from as much as possible as they flood the comments with, nonsense and distractions. Here it is. Here's the documented timeline and receipts showing that the gang stalking network, the Red Triangle nodes, lie to the police. You can see them in the comments as well. You wish, Joseph Camus, or whoever else, right? Those same, bad actors that pop up over and over again in the comments, right? Here it is. Proof once again that the Gang stalking, Red Triangle Network lies, police. But let's get back to Tony now because, I just wanted to focus on Targeted Tony as he is the subject of this live stream. So I'll get back to Tony now. So Targeted Tony, yeah, let's get back to Tony. So here's the proof that Tony lies, right? He told a blatant lie. He's caught red-handed. Please reference the video that I just linked in the chat showing that Targeted Tony lies. He came up with a lie. He got caught red-handed, right? That Candy was breaking the law when she clearly wasn't. Please reference the um, letter from the library staff that is shown at the end of the video showing that Tony is a liar, right? So here's the proof. Once again, I will go ahead and link that in the chat. The Red Triangle Network lies to the police. The Red Triangle Network lies to the police in an attempt to get swatted. That's what's going on here. Why does nobody in the chat seem to want to address that? Oh, it's because they're running a counterintelligence smear campaign. Here is the documented record. Targeted Tony lies to the police, or Targeted Tony came up with a lie, right, that Candy was breaking the law, and that was their plausible, deniable excuse to call the police that day in early 2025, when explicitly it's shown that she had permission to be at the library and all this and that. So, they lied to the police, right? They came up with this lie, right, that she was allowed to be there. Here's the documented record, though. Tony's own words indict him as a swatter, a gang stalker, a liar, a network node. So now that you can see that, you know, Tony is a liar, a swatter, a gang stalker, right? You can reference his own words. It's all on record here. His own words indict him and show exactly who he is, what he's about. The Red Triangle gang stalker. Here's the evidence of that once again. Right, yeah, and he continues, I suppose this is his account, right? He continues to flood the chat or whatever, they flood the chat and try to dehumanize me and say that, "Oh, I'm ugly and low T." It's just the same lazy, low effort dehumanization script as always to try to discredit the target, try to destabilize the target, get the target mad or whatever so they can react and clip something. It's so obvious what they are doing. It's so transparent, really. Here's the evidence once again. Targeted Tony is a liar, a gang stalker, and a squatter. He made up a lie. He told a lie that Candy Grand Prix was breaking the law at the library, breaking the law, right? Which was a lie. Please reference the letter from the library staff that is shown at the end of the video. And he gave the number to the sheriff's office. So here, I post that evidence, right? So the chat can see it in real time. Okay. So now this other network node that's supposedly here for the first time acting in good faith in on the dehumanization smear campaign. So it's all very transparent what's going on with them. They're doing anything possible to try to keep, the truth silent. now I will go ahead and I will post the information in the chat showing that Angie Peterson or well, I went over that. I'm gonna go over Target Tony's Pizza Optics now again. Tony has a Los Angeles County Sheriff's tattoo. What was his story about that? Here's the proof, the pizza optics, right? You know, the pizza optics of your network, right? They are here they are, Tony's own sheriff's tattoo, right? That pretty much put him to retirement after that was exposed. He had to retire his character, and he hasn't really been online much since then, has he? Decides to do that, smear live stream where he was attempting to get Candy swatted, right? Where he was calling on Candy swatted and all that based off of lies. So here's the evidence to show that once again, targeted Tony's pizza optics, right? Targeted Tony's sheriff tattoo, right? Oh, wow, I wonder why the microphone might be malfunctioning right now. I wonder if that has anything to do with, know, network trying to silence the truth, right? Here's the evidence, no matter how my microphone sounds, right, you know, it will not change the, timeline. It does not change the documented facts, right? Back to WikiLeaks in 2016 and see what pizza is really all about because it has a lot to do with the network, doesn't it? The threat coming from your network, pizza network, right? Yeah, and look at that emblem that is on the lo for the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, right? Pizza emblem, right? Symbol there, right? Yep, here they are. Damage control. They're going into major damage control in the comments to try to cover up the truth. All I'm showing is Tony's own words and lies that are on record. Well, there shouldn't be anything wrong at this mic with this microphone at all. I just purchased this microphone, and I have a direct connection to Ethernet, right? So, if anything's malfunctioning with it, I would say that's highly suspicious, don't you think? So, anyhow, anything you have to come up with, though, to obscure the documented timelines and facts, as you continue to flood the chat in a desperate damage control effort, as you continue to loop the same damage control script. It's painfully obvious what you're doing. So now I will go ahead and link these words or not I will want now, right, that Tony and Angie Peterson work together. So for anybody that's just tuning in now, they can see the evidence, right? Without any of the deflections or smears that are trying to cover up the criminal nature of their operation. Proof that targeted Tony and Angie Peterson cross-promote each other. See, now they're, continuing with their dehumanization smears in the comments, right? Continually criticizing, my appearance or claiming, I'm stupid and all this stuff, but no matter how many times they repeat lies, it will not change anything about the documented facts that I'm referencing. So here it is. And actually, it really is very telling that they have to flood the chat as much as they are right now, because it just goes to show how much live stream is damaging the narrative. I am simply referencing their own words, their own lies, their own actions, right, from a year ago when targeted Tony lied on Candy Grand Prix and told the network codes to call the police. So here's the evidence. Yeah, so you going ahead and just running with the same smear campaigns, and by the way, your network failed to make me homeless, failed to make me homeless on the street. That must be pretty embarrassing that you committed so much time and resources to try to destroy me, right? Get me on this whatever. So now this network, desperately extreme anger has to shout from the rooftop about how I still have a home and how bad that is, yeah. So here it is. It doesn't change anything about the timeline or the documented record. Here's the documented timeline, Candy Grand Prix, and, here's the documented timeline, Angie Peterson and Targeted Tony worked together. Here's the evidence that they are trying to cover up desperately in the chat, showing coordination and amplification of each other's showing coordination and amplification of each other's narratives because they try to pretend that they are separate, right? They try to pretend that they are different people, right? Working independently, but in fact, they are part of the same disinformation network that is trying to get the target to destroy the target an individual's life, right? By lying to the police, by, sabotaging them, right? And that's the evidence right there, showing clear collaboration, so cross promotion. Well, I just bought this microphone and it's clearly plugged in, I have an Ethernet connection, so I guess you can go ahead and draw whatever you want from that if it is malfunctioning because there's no reason to be malfunctioning under these, circumstances. As you can see, they desperately are flooding the chat with their damage control, and it's painfully obvious what they're doing. That's what they yeah, that's what they're doing, right? It's painfully obvious what so here they are desperately in the chat, right? Desperately flooding the chat to try to deflect attention away from targeted Tony's own words and actions. Targeted Tony triangles to call the police, and it was all based on a lie that Candy was breaking the law, right? That's what it was all based on, a lie that Candy was breaking the law when the documentation clearly shows that she had explicit permission to be at the library after hours. The letter was signed, notarized, whatever, from the library staff, clearly showing that is the truth that they are trying to cover up and obscure. As you can see, they flood the chat with these disinformation narratives to try to cover up the clear documented timelines. I will go ahead. Okay, so here is words. Okay, I will now post this video again in the chat for anybody who happens to be tuning in right now and any type of news apologize for the mess that's going on in the chat right now. They are desperately trying to cover up the truth. I will go ahead and post documents now, documented timelines, right, of Tony's own words, right? This is documentation of Tony's own words and lies that got Candy Grand Prix swatted in early 2025. He lied. He came up with a lie and was caught red-handed. He said that, Candy was breaking the law, that she was at the library after hours trespassing, and that was the network's, plausible deniability excuse game that they came up with to justify their swatting of Candy Grand Prix at that time. So here's the evidence of that I will post now in the chat once again. That all of these network nodes continue to ignore and try to obscure because they wanna cover up the truth. They don't want the truth getting out there. They want to maintain their lies and their illusions, when in fact, Tony is a liar, he's a squatter, he's a gangster, made up a bunch of lies and held up the stream in front of these network nodes to get Candy swatted. That's what happened. He's a liar, a gang stalker, and a squatter. Tony is a liar, a gang stalker, and a squatter. Here is the documented timeline. I am posting receipts for this now in the chat. Here, looks like my comments are overriding theirs now. Isn't that interesting? Here's the documented timeline. You can't change that no matter how much you lie, no matter how much you distort and divert and deflect your own words. Timeline. That will not change the patterns in the documentation. Here it is. Here it is. Here's the documented timeline. So no matter how many bogus dehumanization scripts you post in the comments, it will not change the fact. It will not change Tony's own words. Here are Tony's own words once again. Here is the evidence. And I know this network hates evidence, so that's why they flood the chat, right? They flood the chat, try to obscure, hide the evidence. They wanna cover up their own crimes. That's what they're doing. That's why they are flooding the chat. They wanna cover up their crimes. The network wants to cover up crime. The chat, because they wanna cover up the truth, because they deflect and divert attention away from Tony's own incriminating words. Tony's own words that indict him, right? As a gang stalker and a squatter and a liar. That's why they are flooding the chat. So here I am documenting the proof again and the evidence for just endless smear campaigns. That's all they have. The same endless smear campaigns that loop the same script over and over and over while I post the documented timeline and proof to back up my claims, while all they have is lies and smears. Here's the proof. Here's the timeline. Here are Tony's own words. It's all on record. It's all on record. So this is all on record now, and I'm documenting your threats and intimidation in the comments. So keep it up. I'm just going to make a further timeline of conduct and all that. So here it is. Tony's own words. I will go ahead and post those once again. Tony's own words that indict him as a gang stalker, a liar, and a squatter. Blah, blah, blah. Same smear scripts. "Oh, wow, he's entitled," or whatever. That's all you're doing is looping the same smear scripts, but you can't address the logic, you can't address the facts, you can't address the documents, the timelines. All you can do is try to deflect attention away from them, right? That's all you're doing. But you can't change your own words. You can't change the past, can you, Tony? Well, Candy is a real person, but you have yet to provide any have you even provided any receipts that you're a real person? You've shown your face on camera. Have you provided any receipts, or are you just running a smear campaign, playing the role of some sort of new persona, new attack dog? That's what it seems like it is. Here's the proof that Targeted Tony is a liar, a gang stalker. Oh, I've got serious issues. Not Targeted Tony, though, the guy that lies on people and gets them swatted and gets them, put up on fake charges and tries to get them potentially, killed by encouraging, these different gang stalkers in your network, the network nodes, the Red Triangle nodes, to call the sheriff's office because that's all on record. That's all on record. Here's the record. Here's the record. Here's the record of Tony's lies. Here's the record of Tony's swatting. Here's the record of Tony's lies. Here's the Tony's gang stalking. Here's the record of Tony swatting attempts. Here's the, record of Tony's gang stalking. It's all here. It's a documented record. You can't change the facts no matter how much you flood the chat with disinformation smears. It doesn't change anything. These are your own words. These are Tony's own words that indict him for exactly what he is. He can look at his own reflection in the mirror. This is who Tony is. This is what Tony is all about. He's a liar, a swatter, and a gang stalker working with the Red Triangle Network. That's on record now by evidence of his, cross promotion with Angie Peterson, right? Just flooding the chat with the typical smear campaigns that pertain to, baseless, mental illness, accusations that are not grounded in reality. You can run a background check on my name. I've never been in a fight. I have never committed any crimes. I'm not a violent person. I am organizing a self-funded private expedition to Antarctica. I am of sound mind and competence. Everything I have put on record and been transparent about disproves these slanderous accusations from the gang stalking network. Here is a record of Tony's lies. Here is a record of Tony's swatting. Here is a record of Tony's gang stalking. Here is a record of Tony's lies. Here is a record of Tony's gang stalking. Here is a record of Tony's when Tony, called on the other network nodes in early 2025 to get Candy Grand Prix wrongfully swatted. I'm already being transparent. I've made my DS-4131 form that I submitted to the US Department of State. I've made a public record of that. What have you shown to prove that you're legitimate? Because all I see is a picture behind an icon picture and a name, but I don't see any, verifiable proof that you're a legitimate person. I don't see any receipts to show that. I'm putting my face on camera. I'm being open and transparent. I'm providing documentation that shows that I'm a legit person with a real background. Can you prove that for yourself? I doubt it. So anyhow, I will go ahead now. So here we go. Here we go. Go ahead and post this proof now. Once again in the chat. You know, here we go. About to post the proof once again. Yeah, and it's painfully obvious how they loop these scripts. Look how repetitive they are. Look how, they just go after the same talking points over and over again. I'm here trying to, post the documented timeline, right? Here's the evidence, though. Go ahead and post this now. Okay. So I will go ahead and post this in the chat now. Here's the documented timeline and receipt target Tony that Tony and Angie cross promoted each other. That they do cross promote each other, that they work together, that they are one in the same network. And notice in this video as well that Candy is being, there's an they attempted another, uh, they attempted to swat her once again that I'm referencing. So think about the optics there when you go back to Tony's phone call when he called on Candy to be swatted wrongfully. So here's the evidence for that. I'm going to continue to post this. This is to show a documented record of the timeline. And I don't care how many dehumanization smear scripts you come up with in the comments, none of that is going to change the facts or the record that I'm posting right now. Proof that Tony and Angie work together, proof that they collaborate, proof that they cross promote each other's work. And as you can see in this video, Andy is being swatted. And who is Angie giving credit to in the video title? She's giving credit to Tony. So think about the optics here. It's very apparent what's going on here. Here's the documented timeline. Here's the proof. There's the proof. And that's all they can do is desperately flood the chat lies. That's all they can do. And I post the documented time and evidence. Here's the proof once again. Here's the timeline. Proof Tony and Angie work together. Proof Tony is red triangle. No, I'm just having to link the information in the chat as the network nodes continue to try to obscure it and try to deflect and divert attention away from it because that's what this live stream is about. It's about exposing targeted Tony's own words, targeted Tony's own behaviors and actions. That's what this is about. And your network running a counterintelligence script in the comments to try to divert and deflect attention away from that for any possible new viewers that are tuning in. Here's the evidence that targeted Tony and Angie Peterson work together. Here's the evidence. All they can do is run damage control in the comments and try to deflect attention and divert attention and obscure this fact. Here's the truth. Targeted Tony and Angie Peterson work together. Now, I'm going to link another video in the chat now to show how this network, right? So here's the proof that the Red Triangle Network lies to the police to get the target swatted. The proof. I will now post a link to this video in the chat once again for anybody who might just be tuning in right now to show a clear pattern of conduct on part of this network. So here's the proof. Here's the proof that the Red Triangle Network, the gang stalking network, lies to the police to get the targets swatted wrongfully and potentially killed because we know how symbolically how trigger happy the police can be nowadays. Please reference modern body dash cam footage from police, and you can see that the police in America are not safe to be around. They are very trigger uh, they are, trigger happy, so to speak, and especially if this network is flooding their, phones with a bunch of lies, making up a bunch of slanderous claims about the target like Tony did in early 2025. So here's the proof of that this network lies to the police and comes up with, slander and other bogus claims to get the targeted individual swatted. Here's the proof. Here's the proof that the Red Triangle Network lies to the police. Well, and here you are watching it running, deflection in the comments because you know how impactful this evidence is and how incriminating it is against the gang stalking network, and here you are trying all you can to smear me and all this and that to try to deflect attention away from what's at hand. Here it is. Here's the proof, screenshotted and everything. This is what this network is all about. It's lying to the police to get the target destroyed, right? They wanna get the target swatted. They wanna see the target harmed. That's what's going on here. More dehumanization smear campaigns in the comments to distract from the topic at hand, that being Tony's own words that indict him as a gang stalker that lied and helped to get Candy swatted in early 2025. Here's proof that this gang stalking network lies to the I'm delusional for simply reading, screenshots and referencing, Tony's own words and referencing Candy Grand Prix's explicit or, clear permission that was given to her by the library staff at Gretna to be there after, of course, the Wi-Fi. That's not delusional, that's just recounting facts in the timeline. Here's the proof that the Red Triangle Network lies to the police. The proof that the Red Triangle Network lies. The documented timeline on a public ledger showing that this network will lie about anything. It will call the police, tell any lie, and you know how dangerous that can be. The police are symbolically very trigger happy, right? How many instances have there been, in recent times of police just mowing down innocent people of, calls to their department, right? And think about the calls that are being made by the Red Triangle Network where they lie and all this and that, right? So they are trying to eliminate the target and get the target, effectively, what they wanna do. Here's the proof that the Red Triangle Network lies to the police. Here's the proof that the Red Triangle Network will lie to the police to get the target swatted. Here is the proof that the Red Triangle Network will lie to the police to get the target swatted, right? This is not up for debate. These are the no's. These are their actions. This is the patterns of their conduct. This is how they behave. This is the timeline. Early 2025, this is what I was saying. Shortly after, Tony called on, these other nodes in the network to call the police, wrongfully call the police on Candy. The documented timeline and Tony's own words won't change anything regardless of how much you feel it won't. Here it is, the documented timeline. Oh, wow. So instead of refuting, I'm linking or referencing the results to intimidation theater. Yeah, that's what you have. It's, it's pitiful and transparent, but, I'm going to New Zealand, you know? I have a expedition to plan and everything of this nature, so that refutes all of your, slant. Here's the proof that the Red Triangle Network lies to the police. Here's the proof in the comment section that the Red Triangle Network lies to the police, wants to get the target swatted, and when you lie to the police, get somebody swatted, they can potentially die. That's so are you trying is this what's going on? Are you trying to kill Candy as a result of these lies, right? Is that what the network's trying to do? A bunch of lies, call the police, target, wrongfully, uh, swatted, potentially killed. What's at stake here? Blah, blah, blah. Just running the same intimidation scripts as all the other nodes, threatening the target into silence, right? All you're doing, the documented timeline, right? Here it is. Because when you wrongfully swat somebody and make up lies to them, knowing how trigger friendly police can be nowadays, it's setting up very serious, implications and risks. That's a logical fact. When you lie to the police, as is on record here, I will link that information now again. The Red Triangle Network lies to the police. The Red Triangle Network lies to the police. The Red Triangle Network lies to the police to get the target swatted. Here is the proof. Here is the proof. Here is the proof. Here is the proof. The documented line. Now, okay, so here I'm gonna post. Tony's own words once again. Proving he's a liar and a swatter. Here is the link showing that Targeted Tony is a liar, a swatter, and a gang stalker. He held a live stream in 2025 where he lied, breaking the law, that she was at the library illegally or whatever, or trespassing and all this nonsense after hours. He called on the network notes to call the sheriff's department. He provided the phone number to the sheriff's department, and he made up this lie. And shortly after that, Candy was swatted, Candy was arrested, and Candy could have even potentially been killed based on these lies. So I will go ahead and post the link to this once again. So now I will post the proof. These videos actually are Tony's own words, library's own, in the library's own notarized document showing Candy had the right to be there. So that proves Tony is a liar. That proves that Tony is a swatter. Here's the evidence and the proof. You don't all you have is your, smear loops. You don't have any logic. You don't have any facts. All you have is lies and smear campaigns to divert and obscure the truth. Here's the truth. Tony's own words that indict him as a gang stalker, a liar, and a swatter. And here the network is flooding the chat with counterintelligence and control. That's all they have. Here they are flooding the chat with their control as I continually post the truth and the fact in Tony's own. Here it is. All you have are the same predictable smear campaigns in the comments to try to cover up these facts. So, anyways, I think made it painfully obvious that this network is not acting in good faith. They don't care about addressing any of the documented timelines, any of the documented any of Tony's own words or actions, as you can see by evidence of how they have continually flooded the and how they continue to run smear campaigns and damage control scripts. They do not want to engage with the facts, the logic, or the official timeline. They do not want to engage with the screenshots. They don't want to engage with Tony's own words. So all they do is try to flood the chat, change the subject, smear the target, put out a bunch of lies, and flood the chat to the point where people that are now tuning in, possibly for the first time, will be dissuaded or scared away from, or otherwise from checking out the real documented timeline and fact. So, anyhow, I'm going to wrap up this live stream right now, and I appreciate anybody genuine who tuned in today and was able to, you know, see, what's at stake and what's on record here, the documented facts and everything of that nature. So, thank you for tuning in, everybody. That was real. Um, and have a good day.